Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Gordon Chang, political commentator and author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Gordon, thank you so much for joining me once again.
Oh, well, thank you, Brittany.
It's a pleasure to have you, and it's a pleasure to get your insight here and your perspective, because this week, China hosted its largest ever military parade to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. International leaders, including North Korea's Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin, were in attendance as China touted advanced jets, tanks, missiles, and drones. So to start off the conversation, what are some of your takeaways from the event?
This was information warfare at its finest. We saw China try to give the appearance of being strong. And over the last 3 or 4 weeks, Chinese propagandists, state, party, and the informal ones, have been showing off China's military hardware and making the case that China now is a strong power. This sort of reminds me of the ancient Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu, and one of his more famous sayings was, "When weak, appear strong." So I think that part of that's what's going on right now. Now, of course, China has a large military. It's very capable. It has some weapons that we don't have. So yes, it is a strong military, but I don't think it is nearly as strong as it portrays itself to be. There are a lot of reasons for that, but at this moment, I think that we are seeing a show, first of all, directed to the Chinese people to show that the Communist Party is capable, but also to the rest of the world to intimidate them.
That's a really interesting take, and it did seem very flashy, showing off all of this military hardware, but you think that that's not really the case. They're actually weak. What is making China so weak right now, in your opinion?
The most important reason for the Chinese military is that there is turmoil at the top. A lot of senior officers have been disappeared recently. Many of them, matter of fact, over the last several months, only Xi Jinping loyalists have been disappeared. And the general narrative is that Xi Jinping got rid of his own supporters. And that's possible, but I don't think that it's true. And the reason is the objective factors point to a different story, that Xi Jinping's adversaries have been getting rid of Xi Jinping's people. And the reason is, we go back to July 9th of last year. That was the first of a series of articles in PLA Daily, which is the main propaganda organ of the Chinese military. And these articles were praising, quote unquote, collective leadership. That's a direct slap at Xi Jinping, who has demanded absolute obedience and has this one-man style of rule. Now, the authors of these articles are aligned with General Zhang Yaoshao, who is the #1 uniformed officer. He is the first vice chairman of the Communist Party's Central Military Commission, and he is known not to be entirely happy with Xi Jinping. And that leads to the conclusion that General Zhang is getting rid of Xi's loyalists in the military. There's been a lot of unhappiness with Xi Jinping in the military ranks for a number of reasons. And so my sense, only a sense, my sense is that Xi Jinping has lost a lot of influence in the Chinese military. Because of this infighting, I don't think it's that effective an organization right now. Now, once they get past this turmoil, yes, they can be fearsome, but not right now. And one other thing, Brittany, China has a communist military. That means it has 2 reporting lines, one political and one military. Of the 2, the military reporting line is the less important. And that means political decisions actually affect the way the Chinese military operates. And that means it's not a way to run a war. You know, they'll be good in the first week when they have a predetermined plan and they're just sort of implementing it. But when they get punched in the face, I'm not sure that they can react. And remember that great philosopher, Mike Tyson, when he said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
What do you think Xi's plan is? Because perhaps the most striking image out of this wasn't even the military hardware at all. It was, in fact, Xi flanked by 2 leaders, Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. What did you make of that? Did you think that was him, once again, trying to show a sign of strength?
Oh, well, that certainly is trying to show a sign of strength, a sign of unity. The message here is that China dominates the world and that the United States is finished. Now, I think that that narrative is wrong. I'm sure President Trump thinks it's wrong, but that message is resonating around the world. This is, I mentioned, information warfare. President Trump has unilaterally disarmed in information warfare because he's gutting Voice of America, and more important, he's gutting Radio Free Asia. And that means China's messages go out and they are not contradicted like they once were. So unless President Trump has something up his sleeve, and he could, this is not a good story for us, because right now the world is buying this narrative that China is more powerful than the United States.
I first want to read something from President Xi that he said and get your reaction. He said this, quote, "The Chinese nation is a great nation that is never intimidated by any bullies and always values independence and forges ahead." He also added this, quote, "History cautions us that humanity rises and falls together. Only when all countries and nations treat each other as equals, coexist in peace, and support each other can we uphold common security, eradicate the root cause of war." I'm reading that, and I'm curious, is that a dig at the West, or perhaps more pointedly, the United States? What's your take?
Yes, I mean, everything or almost everything that China says is meant in one way or another to undermine the United States. I think we should remind the American people that on May 2019, People's Daily, the most authoritative publication in China, carried a landmark editorial that declared a quote unquote people's war on us. Now, we're Americans and we think we have a God-given right to ignore what our enemies say, but people's war is a phrase that has great resonance among the Communist Party officials. And in March of 2023, PLA Daily, if we needed reminding, defined people's war as quote unquote total war. So that message is very different from the ones that Xi Jinping gives. And, you know, we've got this global governance initiative that Xi Jinping unveiled about 3 or 4 days ago. And it sounds nice, multilateralism, we all cooperate, but that's not the way that China operates, because China right now is conducting proxy wars on 2 continents. It's Ukraine and in Gaza, and also it's fueling insurgencies that look like wars in North Africa. So that's almost a proxy war. And then, of course, we have China behind Pakistan's continual assault on India. And of course, they had their 4-day war in May. So this is China, which is disrupting the world. And that is at odds with everything that we have heard from Xi Jinping, not only at this military parade, but in the preceding summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Tianjin just a few days before the military parade.
There were 26 leaders from countries all over the world in attendance, including, like we said, Russia, North Korea, also Iran, Belarus, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Cuba, just to name a few. Does that say anything to you about China's influence?
Well, it does. I mean, there are a couple things. First of all, except for a couple of China-friendly countries in Eastern Europe, there was nobody from the West, and that is important. There was some interesting developments. For instance, Indonesia's President Prabowo, he actually canceled his participation in the SCO meeting because of the riots throughout Indonesia. But he showed up for the military parade. And Indonesia is a very important country. Also, you had President Erdogan of Turkey there. Turkey is a NATO ally, and that's not a good story for the United States by any means. Turkey is, I think, the most difficult foreign policy question for NATO and Europe and the United States. And we saw a demonstration why Turkey is so difficult, because he was there at a celebration of basically, you know, I have friends who call this stolen valor, because this was marking the 80th anniversary of the victory over Japan. Well, the Communist Party had almost nothing to do with that victory. Mao Zedong ducked out of the fighting for just 1 or 2 instances. And also, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, his grandfather also ducked out of the fighting against the Japanese, engaging in only a couple of guerrilla engagements against Japanese forces. So essentially, you had people who had almost nothing, virtually nothing to do with the victory over Japan, making the biggest deal over the 80th anniversary.
And that's something President Trump seemingly took issue with on Truth Social. I'll read in part his response. He said, "The big question to be answered is whether or not President Xi of China will mention the massive amount of support and blood that the United States of America gave to China in order to help it secure its freedom from a very unfriendly foreign invader. Many Americans died in China's quest for victory and glory." And then he went on to say this, which I'm gathering is sarcastic. "Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America." What do you make of that post there? Do you think it perhaps was him wearing his heart on his sleeve? Was that a smart move? What do you make of that?
This is a really interesting Truth Social posting, and one could almost write a book about it. Couple things. First of all, I think Trump is pissed, as he should be, that the Communist Party's history of World War II completely ignores the sacrifice of America and our war against Japan. I mean, the Communist Party thinks that apparently nothing happened in the Pacific. They didn't hear about Hiroshima. Nagasaki's not in that narrative. And so therefore, I can understand President Trump's anger or apparent anger. Now, this part about conspiring is absolutely fascinating because Trump, as everybody knows, has extended olive branches to both Putin and Xi Jinping recently. He's given both of those leaders off-ramps from very dangerous situations, and neither Vladimir Putin nor Xi Jinping have taken those off-ramps. And I think that that's probably what's behind this conspiring remark. I think he understands the depth of support for China that China has given to Russia in the Ukraine war. Matter of fact, I don't think Russia would be in the war now if it weren't for Chinese support. President Trump has done very little to dissuade the Chinese from helping the Russians. And so I think that what we're going to see in the not too distant future is Trump basically pivoting and imposing those costs on both Russia and China for their support. You know, there's a lot of talk about India. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi went to Tianjin for the SCO summit. First time in more than 7 years he's been on Chinese soil. A lot of people make a big deal of that. We know that India is really angry at the United States over two things. First of all, President Trump's pivot to Pakistan, which I think is misguided. And also on August 6th, the Trump administration announced the imposition of those 25% tariffs on India for buying Russian oil. Well, India says that those tariffs are unjustified. They're wrong. They are justified. But India has a real point when it says those tariffs are unfair, because Trump did not impose a 25% tariff on China for buying Russian oil, and China buys more Russian oil than India. As a matter of fact, since the announcement on August 6th, India has been scaling back its purchases of Russian crude, and China's been taking up the slack. I think Trump is sort of getting tired of being disrespected, and I can see a lot of change in that. And that change, as we see China become the target of Trump's attention, I think that that'll help our relations with New Delhi. There's a lot there to unpack, but you can see that as Trump moves against China and Russia, we probably will end up better relations with the world's most populous democracy.
And like you said, I thought the use of the word conspire was very interesting. And Putin seemingly responded to that to reporters. He said something to the effect of, in no setting was this current administration in the United States talked about. Can you believe that? Do you really think that's true, that the United States was not talked about at all in the 4 days that these leaders were together?
All three of those leaders, Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, are completely obsessed by the United States for different reasons, but they all are. So if they had a meeting, I don't know what they talked about if they didn't talk about the United States. So, the thing about lying, if you're a national leader, you should lie in a credible way. That was just completely unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, it not coming up, by it, I mean the United States not coming up once. I mean, it can't be believed. But I'm curious what you think about Iran's president being there. Does that indicate anything to you about China's relationship with the Middle East?
Well, China has been fighting a proxy war against Israel. Although the Iranians don't think that they're anybody's proxy, they look like China's proxy. And we know that Iran has been fighting a proxy war against Israel through Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi militia. So China is behind this. And I think that you can say that the October 7th assault on Israel was really the beginning of a proxy war. So that relationship is tight. China's buying Russian crude. Well, China buys more than 90% of Iran's exports of crude. So we can see that it's China keeping Iran in the fight. So there wouldn't be a war in Ukraine and there wouldn't be a war in Gaza were it not for China.
And when you look at this parade, when you look at these leaders who were there, does that indicate to you anything about Taiwan?
I worry a lot about China and Taiwan, but I don't worry about China starting hostilities with an invasion of the main island of Taiwan. And there are a lot of reasons for it, but the turmoil in the Chinese military. I don't think Xi Jinping has the authority right now to pick up the phone and saying, we're invading Taiwan this afternoon. I don't think the generals and admirals are going to listen to him. But I also don't think that Xi Jinping is inclined to do that. And the reason is an invasion of the main island of Taiwan is a combined air, land, sea operation. That means Xi Jinping has to give some general or some admiral almost complete control of the Chinese military, making that flag officer the most powerful figure in China. Xi Jinping, on his best days, his most confident days, is not about to do that. He's certainly not about to do it now, even if he had the power to do it. So I don't think that's really in the cards. I do worry about China and Taiwan for two reasons. First of all, some of Taiwan's outlying islands, very small, are 2.5, 3 miles away from the Chinese coast. Xi Jinping can grab those anytime he wants. The other thing is that China is engaged in some very belligerent military activity from South Korea in the north to Australia in the south, especially in the South China Sea directed against the Philippines. If one of those incidents spirals into war, which is entirely possible, and the law of averages says that'll happen sometime, I don't think that the Chinese regime right now can de-escalate. Because of the turmoil, only the most hostile answers are considered to be acceptable. If there's a war against, say, Philippines, Taiwan eventually will become involved, as will almost the entire region. China will bring in Russia and North Korea. We will bring in our friends and partners because we have an obligation to defend the Philippines. So Taiwan gets involved in a war that way. But the one thing I don't worry about, maybe I should, but the one thing I don't worry about is China beginning hostilities with an invasion of the main island of Taiwan.
So we see this military parade play out. We see President Trump's response, and we see these leaders all together. What specifically then are you looking out for next?
I'm looking for what President Trump is going to do to try to separate China from Russia. And that is going to cause a chain reaction because it has ripples on trade and all of our other relationships with Beijing. Beijing doesn't stovepipe issues. We try to, China never has done that. So it is going to have an effect on all aspects of our relationship with China. Right now, we've got these wars and insurgencies just spread across 3 continents. I worry that the next conflict starts something much larger. So that's, I always try to look for these things. Trump is really good in trying to de-escalate stuff, but I'm not so sure that he has the ability at this time to prevent a wider war. There's a momentum to war, Brittany. I mean, it's over time. We have seen this, especially over the last 2 or 3 years. And the question that people should ask is, what is going to stop the momentum? I don't see anything right now that's going to stop that. except for maybe Trump doing something really bold and imaginative. But I don't really see that in the cards right now.
Well, I think that that's a good question for all of us to keep our eye out on. And as we see developments on, so much, I hope you can come back on, provide your insight, make some sense of it for us. Gordon Chang, I always appreciate you coming on. You are welcome back anytime. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, well, thank you, Brittany. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. So thank you.